Welcome back to the 9 News Business Buzz. I'm Ryan Frazier, 9 News business expert. We often focus on the Front Range economy, but today we're looking at the other 73% of Colorado's landmass, our rural communities. There's a perception that rural economies are just agriculture and tourism, but the data tells a different story. Rural Colorado has seen 90,000 new business registrations in the past 5 years. And nationally, research shows rural areas actually have higher rates of entrepreneurship per capita than urban areas, driven by necessity, innovation, and local opportunity. To explain why rural entrepreneurship is becoming one of Colorado's next major growth engines, I'm joined by Brittany Romano, Executive Director of Startup Colorado. Brittany, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Brittany, let's start with the landscape. Startup Colorado covers 53 counties. Your network has grown to more than 2,100 entrepreneurs. We know about the destination resorts like Vail and the heritage agricultural communities like Yuma, but you share that rural economy is far more diverse. Beyond the farm and slopes, what are we seeing in terms of tech and innovation from cybersecurity to quantum emerging in these rural hubs?
Sure. Yeah. Colorado is way more diverse than most people are aware of. And nowadays, every company is having to think about tech enablement and tech-enabled growth. And so out across the entire state, we're seeing and we see this happening in energy transition regions, where there's lots of interesting innovation happening there. We're also seeing emerging creative and entrepreneurial tech hubs in places like Florence or Canyon City, Salida, out in Lahana even. There's a quantum company that is in Grand Junction and a aerospace company in Durango. So really interesting companies are standing up and growing all across the state of Colorado.
Yeah, now the job creation numbers are striking. New and young firms under 5 years old create the majority of net new jobs in Colorado, but there's a real capital gap when it comes to rural Colorado. Less than 1% of venture capital dollars reach rural zip codes. Banks have cut rural business lending by nearly 50% over the last decade. As you know, Brittany, money is oxygen. How does a rural founder compete when the traditional banking and VC systems are pulling back? And tell us about this rural angel investment network that you've got going.
Sure. Well, it's pretty well known that out in rural, our founders have to be really innovative about the ways that they're financing their companies. It's quite normal to see most of these companies bootstrapped or founders relying on their own personal savings, their own personal credit, and friends and family rounds to help get their ideas off the ground and out of the garage. And so this, in the next few years, there's certainly forecasted to be even less debt capital available to our rural founders. And so in response to that, and in partnership with one of the most active venture capital firms, Howdy Partners, based out of Durango, we're building what is right now we're calling the Rural Angel Investment Network. And I like to say we want to make it rain on our rural founders. And the idea is that capital for the foreseeable future needs to be hyperlocal. We do have communities like Aspen, Telluride, Crested Butte, Durango, Steamboat, and so forth, these global resort destinations that do attract and aggregate the investor type, those with expanded networks. And so the idea is that if we could pull together those people and those resources, we might be able to solve for what is now what I believe to be a $500 million access to capital gap across the state.
Yeah, now you've said, Brittany, that social capital, access to those networks and mentors and experts is the #1 predictor of business success. In cities,
Right.
proximity makes that easy. In rural communities, the proximity is often, it just doesn't exist. How do you bridge the gap, and how is Startup Colorado connecting rural founders with the networks and resources that usually live along the Front Range?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for asking that. Yeah, so rural Colorado has tremendous amounts of social capital, but it's harder for us to build newer networks just because our communities are so disparate. And yet, Colorado is one of the few states that's intentionally building rural and urban social capital at scale. That's important to highlight there. So, Startup Colorado was based out of Boulder. A big part of Boulder's their tech scene and their startup scene in the early days. And pretty quickly on, we realized that the Boulder experiment, or what led to Boulder's expansion, is replicable across the state, especially where across rural we do have pretty active entrepreneurial hubs and capital hubs. And so the Startup Colorado is really about mobilizing predictable, accessible resources for any stage of business across the entire state. So we do partner with a lot of Front Range, Denver, Boulder advisor networks, such as Bridge Entrepreneurs Network. We have a tremendous amount of capital partners in the Denver, Boulder, even Colorado Springs area. We rely heavily on our academic institutions to build bridges for us. And so that's a really big focus for us in 2026, but also just years to come. The need for us to act cohesively as a state is becoming increasingly more important.
Now, rural Colorado has seen 20 to 30% increase in self-employment rates since the pandemic. Over 50% of rural youth say they would stay if local career paths were stronger. What does this say about the potential for rural entrepreneurship and business in Colorado? Or in other words, Brittany, why does this make the case that rural Colorado is the next economic engine for our state?
Sure. Yes, and there's some incredible work being done with our youth. We're reaching back into time and creating more opportunities for young folks to make local investments or to bloom and flourish where they're planted. What does this say about our future for Colorado? The rural in general has more land and less barriers. It has increasingly more talent, more tech talent. The barriers are lower in some ways to grow a company. It's a little different when we're talking about starting a company. But as people are starting to identify the lifestyle that they love, like the reasons why they have come to Colorado and want to have families and build businesses here, is a big part of why we're seeing this growth. And the message we want to get out to the world is that with this awareness and with these opportunities, rural is becoming an increasingly more desirable place to scale companies.
Yeah. Brittany Romano with Startup Colorado, thank you so much for joining us. What's clear is that rural Colorado isn't just an afterthought. It's a strategic driver of our state's future. And when we bridge the gap between our rural counties and our Front Range hubs, the whole state wins, with more jobs, more innovation, and more opportunity. As business keeps buzzing here in Colorado, our goal is for you to be informed, stay engaged, and get ahead of the game. So for the 9 News Business Buzz, stay tuned. I'm Ryan Frazier. See you next time.